The Book of Esther tells us the story of Esther. It's a very compelling story of faith, very interesting story. We can understand why it would resonate for the people of Israel and all the things they've unfortunately suffered throughout time. And we do well to consider the Book of Esther and what we can gain from it. We don't know who wrote the Book of Esther. Its author is anonymous. There was some challenges in ancient times to its very presence in Scripture because the name of God is never found in its pages. However, that does not mean that the hand of God cannot be seen in all the events that take place within the story. The story would take place in the days of Ahasuerus, who we believe is Xerxes, the king of the Persian Empire, who would have reigned in the period around 480 BC. In fact, the events in the story and the 3 dates of the story would seem to go from about something like 486 to about 474 BC. And the book would have likely been written after that by some point. The author seems very acquainted with the Persian court and therefore probably written sometime during the Persian Empire days, so before 332 BC. In English Bibles, Esther is the end of the historical books. It comes after Ezra and Nehemiah, and then you've got books like Job and the wisdom literature after that. So we kind of look at it as the end of the history, even though the events that take place in it would have taken place before certainly the days of Nehemiah and half of the book of Ezra. In the Hebrew Bible, it's part of the writings, and not just part of the writings, but part of the Megalot, or the 5 scrolls. And it is read every year in the synagogues on Purim in its entirety, as a reminder of all that it records. So what's going on in this book of Esther? Well, Esther begins with Ahasuerus. We're going to call him Xerxes because it's a lot easier to say. And Xerxes is ruling over this large empire, and it's well attested here, all the different provinces, and he's feasting lavishly, and he's feasting for a very long time. At the same time, his wife Vashti is also feasting. And Xerxes wants to show his wife off, so he summons Vashti. And Vashti knows she's going to be summoned to be shown off, and so Vashti refuses his call. And the men of the court are incensed at her behavior, and they declare, Xerxes, if you let this stand, all the women in the whole empire are going to show contempt for their husbands. And they're going to say that, Vashti did not come when Xerxes called her. And so you can't let this stand. You have to kick her out. And so Xerxes deposes Vashti as queen. In chapter 2, we learn that after his rage diminished, he missed having a queen, right? And so he made a call out to all of the land for the best of the virgins to come, and he would choose which he would make his queen. At this time, we're told about a man named Mordecai. He's Jewish. He is of the household of Benjamin and seems related to a descendant of King Saul through Shimei. And he was the guardian of his niece, Hadassah, who is also named Esther. She's a very attractive young woman. And so Mordecai works the situation so that Esther will be one of these young women. And she was told not to say to anybody, her ancestry, that she was Jewish. Now, there's a year of preparation. And during this time, she gained the favor of the chief eunuch. And the chief eunuch told her what she needed to know, explained to her what she needed to explain, how she would make the king very happy. And so when it was her time to be with the king was taken with her because she knew what to do. And then Esther was elevated as the queen of Persia. And so now Esther is sitting in this position as queen. We're then told that there is this moment where Mordecai is in the king's gate, which is at a kind of the very busy place. And there discovers a plot of 2 eunuchs to kill the king. And he makes it known to Esther, and Esther makes it known in the name of Mordecai. And the eunuchs are found, and they are executed, and the whole thing is recorded in the king's annals. And that will be very important later on. Chapter 3, we're introduced to a new character. He's the bad guy, the antagonist, Haman, the Agagite. The Agagite, we should understand from Agag, the king of Amalek, from 1 Samuel 15. And he was elevated in the kingdom. And all the king's servants would bow down to him, but Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And it really annoys him to the point of anger. So he decides he's going to cast lots. And he casts lots for the 12th month of Adar, that is when he was going to try to get his revenge against Mordecai and his people. And he asked Xerxes for the ability to go and just kill them all. Kill all the Jewish people. And this would lead to all kinds of money, because he's going to take all the money he would loot from the Jewish people and give it to the king, or at least part of it to the king, and then kept some for himself. And Xerxes just signs off on this, trusting his officials. And so The decree is now made for the destruction of the Jewish people. Mordecai finds out about it. He tears his garments. He's in mourning and lamentation. Esther finds out about it, and she's overcome with anguish, wants to know what's going on. Now, they can't communicate directly, so they communicate through Hathach, her eunuch. Mordecai sends her a copy of the decree and what's going to happen. Esther is very concerned about it. There's this rule that if you come before the king without the king calling for you, the sentence is death. He has to raise his scepter towards you in order to keep you from dying. You might think that's extreme, but you got to remember, Xerxes' father Darius took on the throne because he was in a conspiracy with a few of his other Persians and killed the guy they claimed as a pretender who was installed as king before him. And so you can understand why the rule was if you were coming to the king without an audience, you were going to be killed, might exist. They were concerned about assassination plots. It makes a little bit more sense that way. But you understand why Esther's concerned. But notice what Mordecai sends as a response in Esther 4, beginning in verse 13. Don't imagine that because you are part of the king's household, you will be the one Jew who will escape. If you will keep quiet this time, liberation and protection for the Jews will appear from another source, while you and your father's household perish. It may very well be that you have achieved royal status for such a time as this. So notice Mordecai's unshaking faith in God. Somewhere there's going to be deliverance, but if you don't do anything, you might die and your father's house with you. And so Esther is thus convinced that the situation is of severe enough difficulty, that it provides enough of a challenge that it's worth the prospect that maybe the king is mad and doesn't lift his scepter toward her and she dies. So she calls for a 3-day fast for everybody. Everybody fasts. And after 3 days in chapter 5, Esther puts on all of her royal attire, puts on all the glam, and then appears before Xerxes. And Xerxes, of course, raises his golden scepter toward her and asks her what she wants. And she says, I just want to have a feast with you and Haman. And so they go and they have this feast that very day. And Xerxes asks, well, what do you want? And Esther says, I want you to come back tomorrow with Haman for another feast. Now, Esther's being very political and diplomatic about this. She knows exactly what to do here. And so Haman walks away from this, and we're seeing that he's very elevated himself, right? Hey, I just had a feast with the queen. I'm supposed to come back to a feast the next day with the queen. And then he turns and sees Mordecai. And that just ruins his whole day, because there's Mordecai there again. And so in his anger, he goes home and he says, look, all this great stuff's happened to me, but there's Mordecai. And so he decides, you know what? I'm going to build gallows and ask the king to kill Mordecai. And so the gallows are made. And we've got this scene where Haman in the morning is heading toward Xerxes in order to ask for this. And in chapter 6, we're told that Xerxes can't sleep that night. And so Xerxes has the annals read because it would definitely help with your insomnia to have the very dry listings of all the things going on read to you. And in the process of this going on, it is read how Mordecai had found out about this plot and had saved the life of the king. And Xerxes asked, well, what's been done for him about this? And he finds out nothing had been done for Mordecai about this. And so Haman, at this moment, walks right in. And Xerxes asks Haman, hey, what should be done for the guy the king wants to honor? And Haman is full of himself, and so he's assuming, well, who else would the king want to honor but me? And so he says, bring a royal attire the king has worn and a horse that he has ridden, and put it on this guy. Let him be, brought around the plaza, crying out before him, so shall it be done to the man the king wants to honor. Thinking, of course, he's going to say that he should have it done to himself. So you can only imagine Haman's response when Xerxes says, go do that very thing for Mordecai the Jew. The very guy Haman's been coming in to ask to be killed. So Haman, good servant, goes, does what he's told, puts that stuff on Mordecai, walks Mordecai around. Again, you can only imagine how Haman felt about the whole thing, right? Then Haman very gloomily goes home, tells his friends and family what happened. And his friends and family, not great comforters, told him, if in fact Mordecai, whom you've begun to follow, is Jewish, you will not prevail against him, you will fall before him. Very encouraging family and friends, right? But they aren't wrong, as we're going to see. Because now, of course, it's feast time. So now Haman goes to his feast. They've feasted. Xerxes again asks Esther what she wants. And again, Esther is very diplomatic. And notice what she says. If I met with your approval, O king, and if the king is so inclined, in Esther 7:3, grant me my life as my request, and my people as my petition. For we have been sold, both I and my people, to destruction and to slaughter and annihilation. If we had been simply sold as male and female slaves, I would have remained silent, for such distress would not have been sufficient for troubling the king. Notice she's saying, if we were all sold as slaves, I wouldn't bother you, but we're all going to be killed, so I have to beg to you. And Xerxes is now enraged. Who would want to kill my wife? Who would want to do this? And she then points out, it is this oppressor and enemy, this evil Haman. And Xerxes is so angry that he just has to leave, go outside for a minute to collect himself. Meanwhile, Haman throws himself down at Esther's feet, trying to beg for forgiveness. And Xerxes sees this and thinks that this means that Haman's trying to rape Esther, to assault the queen. And he goes, and would you really assault the queen in my presence? And when kings say stuff like that, it's no longer a question. The eunuchs grab Haman and cover his face. And it's told him, hey, he built these gallows to hang Mordecai. And the king said, well, go hang him on it. And so indeed, the very gallows Haman built for Mordecai were the gallows upon which Haman was in fact hanged. But there's still that nasty, pesky decree out there, right? And the law of the Medes and Persians says you can't revoke a decree. That would mean that the law of the Medes and Persians can be changed. And so instead you do a creative workaround, where as opposed to the decree that all the Jewish people will be killed on this day in Adar, all of a sudden the new decree being established is that in fact the Jewish people will be able to get vengeance on their enemies instead. And because the word went out about Haman's fall and Mordecai's rise and Esther being Jewish, there was great fear in all the land. And we are told that when the time comes, there is a great slaughter of the enemies of the Jewish people for not just 1 day, but 2 days, based upon Xerxes asking Esther if anything more could be done, and more was done. In fact, the 10 sons of Haman are killed in this whole thing, and so there's a great slaughter of all the enemies of Israel. But the text makes very clear they did not take any of the property. They did not seize any of the property. They weren't doing it for their greed, like Haman was doing it for. They were just trying to maintain themselves in their standing. And then after this, all this stuff is written down, and Esther makes a decree that there would be a feast that would be maintained throughout perpetuity, that they would always remember the Feast of Purim to honor how God had provided deliverance for them in this way. And the book ends in chapter 10 by declaring how Mordecai was made second in command to Xerxes. And Esther maintained her standing as well, and it all went well for them, and the people were well advocated for. And thus we have the Book of Esther and the story of Esther. And it's a very powerful and compelling story. We see Esther as a girl in very difficult circumstances, and put in very difficult circumstances, but using what she did have available to her. Her appeal, her ability to understand the politics of the court, and how to successfully negotiate the life of her and her people, and in fact to elevate her people, and of course it leads to Mordecai's elevation as well. But we got a conundrum about the Book of Esther. It's a very challenging conundrum because, well, it's very hard to reconcile this way the story is put with what we know about the Persian Empire. See, at this point we now have some additional sources about the Persian Empire that we didn't have when it comes to earlier times, because the same Xerxes that we're reading about in the story is the Xerxes who, Ahasuerus who led a whole army to Greece and fought against the Greeks, whom Herodotus writes about in his histories. And it's not just Herodotus, we have other sources as well, Greek, and we also have some Persian texts. And so one of the major challenges, for instance, is that Xerxes has a wife, but her name is not Vashti or Esther, it's Amestris. Amestris is one of the Persian nobility. In fact, the Achaemenid kings of Persia had tended to marry in the nobility of the Persians and weren't marrying outside of it. You might argue, well, Vashti and Esther is part of the harem. Well, we don't have evidence that there was a harem. We don't have any idea that Xerxes had any other women except for his wife Amestris from any of these other sources. No one else mentions this kind of thing happening. On top of that, the dating is challenging. The 7th year when all this would happen is 480 BC. And we know that's the very year Xerxes is personally leading his army through Turkey into Greece and fighting in Greece. It's very hard for him to be fighting in Greece and also in Susa, learning of the appeals of Esther. On top of all of that, the story sounds a lot like some mythological stories, maybe talking about how the Jewish people had started taking up a Babylonian feast of Purim that was associated with the Akitu festival. Mordecai and Esther are the names of Marduk and Ishtar, gods of Babylon, god and goddess of Babylon in particular, and so maybe there's some mythological stories going on there. We have that association underneath the story with Mordecai and Saul, with Haman and Agag, kind of Amalek, right? And evoking the Saul versus Amalek, 1 Samuel 15, the people of God and the enemies of the people of God. It's challenging to... we can maybe imagine Mordecai understanding he is a descendant of Saul, but we don't hear about the Amalekites after the time of David. And so 600 years later, I mean, there's no thing saying it's impossible for there to be an Agagite, but why would he call himself an Agagite? We don't have no other records of Agagites. And so it's just a kind of a challenging portrayal. And saying, well, it's about his character and not his origin, well, we don't see that being the case for a lot of these other times that kind of language is being used. On the other hand, the Persian court is being very well represented in this story. This is exactly how the court worked. There'd be these lavish feasts. You would have this ridiculous kind of thing. Chapter 1 seems ridiculous, but in the very rarefied world of the court that's very divorced from reality, they might think of themselves as that important, and that kind of thing needed to be done. And so the way the court worked is very accurately portrayed in this book. And as far as we can tell, the author has characterized Xerxes very accurately. From what we can tell from all other evidence, Xerxes loved his parties, lavish gift giver, was willing to go along with what his advisors want him to do, and well known for his temper. And that's, of course, marks throughout the whole story. And so, what do we do with the Book of Esther? It's a challenging thing, because the spirit of the story is right, the details are challenging. Some are willing to consider historical fiction. We have parallels with that in apocryphal books like Tobit, and especially in terms of Judith, where you have those historical details that are very much inaccurate, but you can appreciate the spirit of the story and what it's trying to convey. We should also note that in the Greek Septuagint, there are additions to the Book of Esther. There's additional material that we did not talk about here, looking at the story in its canonical form that don't really add to the story, it's kind of heighten certain aspects of the story. And if the book were in the Apocrypha, we wouldn't have no questions or challenges saying it was historical fiction. But it's in the canon. It's part of the Bible that's been handed down to us, and so that's where our struggle comes in with considering it as historical fiction. And the other challenge of it being historical fiction is that it so well and eloquently testifies to what Israel would experience time and time again. That there will be plenty of Hamans afterward. Plenty of people who were, for profit, for whatever reason, trying to destroy and exterminate and commit genocide against Israel, the people of God. And yet there would always be that confidence, like Mordecai had, that God would provide deliverance. And God did provide deliverance time and time again. We can understand why the story is read every year at Purim. We can understand why, for a lot of Jewish people, even if the historical details seem difficult, the spirit of the story seems accurate, because there's always those enemies, and God yet somehow always provides a way for them to be delivered. In fact, one of the fascinating things is in the Talmud about this book. One of the rabbis said that it was important, it was necessary to get so drunk during Purim that you can no longer tell the difference between blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman. And that's to really just get into the whole revelry of celebrating what God had done for his people in that deliverance. And so that's the Book of Esther. It's a powerful story. We can understand why. We can take a lot from it, and it can be used to encourage our faith. There's some questions and challenges with the historical details. But the spirit of the story is certainly something that will be animated, because there's certainly all kinds of times where the Israelites would suffer a guy like Haman, and God would yet deliver them to this day. We're so glad you've joined us in our conversation about the Book of Esther. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, please let us know. And continue our conversation on the comments. I'm Ethan with the Adventist Church of Christ. We're a church in Los Angeles and love to be of encouragement service to you. Can we pray for you? Would you like to study the Bible with us or take Bible correspondence courses? You want to meet with us? There's something else we can do for you. Let us know at AdventistChurchOfChrist.org, or you can find us on social media at Adventist Church or Adventist Church of Christ in many places. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you until we're able to meet again.